citizens of the City of Truth. We have for you today a short reading from The Great Tradition, an anthology on education. This is from the 10 Books on Architecture by Roman author Vitruvius. This reading is from Chapter 1, The Education of the Architect. The architect should be equipped with knowledge of many branches of study and varied kinds of learning, for it is by his judgment that all work done by the other arts is put to test. This knowledge is the child of practice and theory. Practice is the continuous and regular exercise of employment where manual work is done with any necessary material according to the design of a drawing. Theory, on the other hand, is the ability to demonstrate and explain the productions of dexterity on the principles of proportion. It follows, therefore, that architects who have aimed at acquiring manual skill without scholarship have never been able to reach a position of authority to correspond to their pains, while those who relied only upon theories and scholarship were obviously hunting the shadow, not the substance. But those who have a thorough knowledge of both, like men armed at all points, have the sooner attained their object and carried authority with them. In all matters, but particularly in architecture, there are these 2 points: the thing signified, and that which gives it its significance. That which is signified is the subject of which we may be speaking, and that which gives significance is a demonstration on scientific principles. It appears then that one who professes himself an architect should be well versed in both directions. He ought therefore to be both naturally gifted and amenable to instruction. Neither natural ability without instruction, nor instruction without natural ability can make the perfect artist. Let him be educated, skillful with the pencil, instructed in geometry, know much history, have followed the philosophers with attention, understand music, have some knowledge of medicine, know the opinions of the jurists, and be acquainted with astronomy and the theory of the heavens. The reasons for all this are as follows. An architect ought to be an educated man so as to leave a more lasting remembrance in his treatises. Secondly, he must have a knowledge of drawing so that he can readily make sketches to show the appearance of the work which he proposes. Geometry also is of much assistance in architecture, and in particular it teaches us the use of the rule and the compasses, by which especially we acquire readiness in making plans for buildings in their grounds, and rightly apply the square, the level, and the plummet. By means of optics, again, the light in buildings can be drawn from fixed quarters of the sky. It is true that it is by arithmetic that the total cost of buildings is calculated and measurements computed, but the difficult questions involving symmetry are solved by means of geometrical theories and methods. A wide knowledge of history is requisite because, among the ornamental parts of an architect's design for a work, there are many the underlying idea of whose employment he should be able to explain to inquirers. For instance, suppose him to set up the marble statues of women in long robes, called caryatids, to take the place of columns, with the mutules and coronas placed directly above their heads. He will give the following explanation to his questioners. Caryae, a state in Peloponnesus, sided with the Persian enemies against Greece. Later the Greeks, having gloriously won their freedom by victory in the war, made common cause and declared war against the people of Caryae. They took the town, killed the men, abandoned the state to desolation, and carried off their wives into slavery, without permitting them, however, to lay aside the long robes and other marks of their rank as married women, so that they might be obliged not only to march in the triumph, but to appear forever as a type of slavery, burdened with the weight of their shame, and so making atonement for their state. Hence the architects of the time designed for public buildings statues of these women, placed so as to carry a load, in order that the sin and the punishment of the peoples of Caryae might be known and handed down even to posterity. Likewise, the Lacedaemonians under the leadership of Pausanias, son of Agesipolis, after conquering the Persian armies infinite in number, with a small force at the battle of Palatea, celebrated a glorious triumph with the spoils and booty, and with the money obtained from the sale thereof built the Persian porch, to be a monument to the renown and valor of the people and a trophy of victory for posterity. And there they set effigies of the prisoners arrayed in barbarian costume and holding up the roof, their pride punished by this deserved affront, that enemies might tremble for fear of the effects of their courage, and that their own people, looking upon this ensample of their valor and encouraged by the glory of it, might be ready to defend their independence. So from that time on, many have put up statues of Persians supporting entablatures and their ornaments, and thus from that motive have greatly enriched the diversity of their works. There are other stories of the same kind which architects ought to know. As for philosophy, it makes an architect high-minded and not self-assuming, but rather renders him courteous, just, and honest without avariciousness. This is very important, for no work can be rightly done without honesty and incorruptibility. Let him not be grasping nor have his mind preoccupied with the idea of receiving perquisites, but let him with dignity keep up his position by cherishing a good reputation. These are among the precepts of philosophy. Furthermore, philosophy treats of physics, in Greek, physiologia, where a more careful knowledge is required, because the problems which come under this head are numerous and of very different kinds, as, for example, in the case of the conducting of water. For at points of intake and at curves, and at places where it is raised to a level, currents of air naturally form in one way or another, and nobody who has not learned the fundamental principles of physics from philosophy will be able to provide against the damage which they do. So the reader of Ctesippus or Archimedes and the other writers of treatises of the same class will not be able to appreciate them unless he has been trained in these subjects by the philosophers. Music also the architect ought to understand, so that he may have knowledge of the canonical and mathematical theory, and besides be able to tune ballistae, catapults, and scorpions to the proper key. For to the right and left in the beams are the holes in the frames through which the strings of twisted sinew are stretched by means of windlasses and bars, and these strings must not be clamped and made fast until they give the same correct note to the ear of the skilled workman. For the arms thrust through those stretched strings must, on being let go, strike their blow together at the same moment, but if they are not in unison, they will prevent the course of projectiles from being straight. In theatres likewise there are the bronze vessels, in Greek echea, which are placed in niches under the seats in accordance with the musical intervals on mathematical principles. These vessels are arranged with a view to the musical concords or harmony, and apportioned in the compass of the fourth, the fifth, and the octave, and so on up unto the double octave, in such a way that when the voice of an actor falls in unison with any of them, its power is increased, and it reaches the ears of the audience with greater clearness and sweetness. Water organs, too, and the other instruments which resemble them cannot be made by one who is without the principles of music. The architect should also have a knowledge of the study of medicine on account of the questions of climates, in Greek klimata, air, the healthiness and unhealthiness of sites, and the use of different waters. For without these considerations, the healthiness of a dwelling cannot be assured. And as for the principles of law, he should know those which are necessary in the case of buildings having party walls, with regard to water dripping from the eaves, and also the laws about drains, windows, and water supply. And other things of this sort should be known to architects, so that, before they begin upon buildings, they may be careful not to leave disputed points for the householders to settle after the works are finished, and so that in drawing up contracts the interests of both employer and contractor may be wisely safeguarded. For if a contract is skillfully drawn, each may obtain a release from the other without disadvantage. From astronomy we find the east, west, south, and north, as well as the theory of the heavens, the equinox, solstice, and courses of the stars. If one has no knowledge of these matters, he will not be able to have any comprehension of the theory of sundials. Consequently, since this study is so vast in extent, embellished and enriched as it is with many different kinds of learning, I think that men have no right to profess themselves architects hastily, without having climbed from boyhood the steps of these studies, and thus, nursed by the knowledge of many arts and sciences, having reached the heights of the holy ground of architecture. But perhaps to the inexperienced it will seem a marvel that human nature can comprehend such a great number of studies, and keep them in the memory. Still, the observation that all studies have a common bond of union and intercourse with one another will lead to the belief that this can easily be realized. For a liberal education forms, as it were, a single body made up of these members. Those, therefore, who from tender years receive instruction in the various forms of learning, recognize the same stamp on all the arts, and an intercourse between all studies, and so they more readily comprehend them all. This is what led one of the ancient architects, Pytheos, the celebrated builder of the temple of Minerva at Priene, to say in his commentaries that an architect ought to be able to accomplish much more in all the arts and sciences than the men who, by their own particular kinds of work and the practice of it, have brought each a single subject to the highest perfection. But this is in point of fact not realized. For an architect ought not to be, and cannot be, such a philologian as was Aristarchus, although not illiterate, nor a musician like Aristoxenus, though not absolutely ignorant of music, nor a painter like Apelles, though not unskilful in drawing, nor a sculptor such as was Myron or Polycletus, though not unacquainted with the plastic art, nor again a physician like Hippocrates, though not ignorant of medicine. Nor in the other sciences need he excel in each, though he should not be unskilful in them. For in the midst of all this great variety of subjects, an individual cannot attain to perfection in each, because it is scarcely in his power to take in and comprehend the general theories of them. Still, it is not architects alone that cannot in all matters reach perfection, but even men who individually practice specialties in the arts do not all attain to the highest point of merit. Therefore, if among artists working each in a single field not all, but only in a few of an entire generation acquire fame, and that with difficulty, how can an architect, who has to be skillful in many arts, accomplish not merely the feat, in itself a great marvel, of being deficient in none of them, but also that of surpassing all those artists who have devoted themselves with unremitting industry to single fields? It appears, then, that Pytheos made a mistake by not observing that the arts are each composed of two things, the actual work and the theory of it. One of these, the doing of the work, is proper to men trained in the individual subject, while the other, the theory, is common to all scholars. For example, to physicians and musicians the rhythmical beat of the pulse and its metrical movement. But if there is a wound to be healed or a sick man to be saved from danger, the musician will not call, for the business will be appropriate to the physician. So in the case of a musical instrument, not the physician, but the musician will be the man to tune it, so that the ears may find their due pleasure in its strains. Astronomers likewise have a common ground for discussion with musicians in the harmony of the stars, and musical concords and tetrads and triads of the fourth and the fifth, and with geometricians in the subject of vision, and in all other sciences many points, perhaps all, are common so far as the discussion of them is concerned. But the actual undertaking of works which are brought to perfection by the hand, and its manipulation, is the function of those who have been specially trained to deal with a single art. It appears, therefore, that he has done enough and to spare who in each subject possesses a fairly good knowledge of those parts, with their principles, which are indispensable for architecture, so that, if he is required to pass judgment and to express approval in the case of those things or arts, he may not be found wanting. As for men upon whom nature has bestowed so much ingenuity, acuteness, and memory, that they are able to have a thorough knowledge of geometry, astronomy, music, and the other arts, they go beyond the functions of architects and become pure mathematicians. Hence they can readily take up positions against those arts, because many are the artistic weapons with which they are armed. Such men, however, are rarely found, but there have been such at times. For example, Aristarchus of Samos, Philolaus and Archytas of Tarentum, Apollonius of Perga, Aristophanes of Cyrene, and among Syracusans, Archimedes and Scopinas, who through mathematics and natural philosophy discovered, expounded, and left to posterity many things in connection with mechanics and with sundials. Since, therefore, the possession of such talents due to natural capacity is not vouchsafed at random to entire nations, but only to a few great men, since, moreover, the function of the architect requires a training in all the departments of learning, and finally, since reason, on account of the wide extent of the subject, concedes that he may not possess not the highest, but not even necessarily a moderate knowledge of the subjects of study, I request, Caesar, both of you, and of those who may read the said books, that if anything is set forth with too little regard for grammatical rule, it may be pardoned. for it is not as a very great philosopher, nor as an eloquent rhetorician, nor as a grammarian trained in the highest principles of his art, that I have striven to write this work, but as an architect who has had only a dip into those studies. Still, as regards the efficacy of the art and the theories of it, I promise and expect that in these volumes I shall undoubtedly show myself of very considerable importance, not only to builders, but to all scholars.